Good afternoon, everyone. Wasn't that a fantastic lunch session that we had? Thank you to Michael Sorrell, the Chancellor, and James Miner. And welcome to Grad Talks, the California State University's short but thought-provoking, engaging presentations in talk show style. To those who are joining us via live stream, thank you. Thank you for tuning in. And to our live audience, I look forward to engaging with you in conversation at the conclusion of the presentations. And as a reminder to all, you can join the discussion on Twitter using hashtag GradInitiative2025. My name is Gail Hutchinson. I have the distinct honor of serving as president of California State University, Chico. Go Wildcats! Chico State is the second oldest campus in the CSU system, founded in 1887. The campus is located in Northern California, specifically where the Sacramento Valley ends and the foothills to the Sierra Nevada mountain range begins. We have more than 17,000 students, most of whom are from underserved communities and are first in their families to attend college. Like all of you, we are deeply committed to Graduation Initiative 2025. As we work together to enhance student success, increase graduation rates, lower time to degree, and eliminate equity gaps. All of us do this work knowing that a CSU education, a high-quality education, transforms the lives of our students, their families, and communities. And as Dr. Miner says, it actually transforms family trees. As part of our initiative efforts, Chico State established an annual one-day summit called The Tipping Point, focused on critical make-or-break moments in our students' lives. It is a professional development day for staff and faculty to hear from our students and from each other about the barriers to success, as well as innovative pedagogy and support programs that help students overcome those barriers. We frame our conversations with our university's strategic priorities: equity, diversity, inclusion, civic and global engagement, resilient and sustainable systems. As a system, we are effecting change through each of the 6 pillars that define the Graduation Initiative. We have eliminated standalone developmental education courses to a dramatic effect. We have hired new tenure-track faculty and added course sections. All 23 campuses have food pantries. Students are signing up for CalFresh benefits, and 2/3 of our campuses offer on-campus emergency housing. Campuses are providing financial assistance such as micro-grants and completion grants to support student efforts to graduate on time. And campuses continue to rework our registration processes in hopes to ease barriers to graduation. Across the CSU, we are at a tipping point, a moment in time when a series of small changes becomes significant enough to cause a larger, more important, and sustainable change. Through our collective efforts, we ask the question, is it enough? And through our collective efforts, we know it is abundantly clear that to achieve student success, increase graduation rates, lower time to degree, and eliminate equity gaps, we must reinforce the idea that student success is everyone's responsibility. From meeting students' basic needs to providing learning support, such as advising, tutoring, innovative pedagogy, students will succeed when we meet them where they are and pave the way for them to achieve academic and personal success. We all have a part to play to better serve our students and to ensure they achieve their academic goals while at the CSU. This is not life as usual. It is a time of innovation, and it is a time of intentionality, which brings us here, where we are fortunate today to have with us 3 extraordinary thought leaders. Our first speaker is educator and entrepreneur, Alexandra Bernadotte. Alexandra is the founder and CEO of Beyond 12, a high-tech, high-touch nonprofit that integrates personalized coaching with mobile technology to increase the number of traditional underserved students who graduate from college. Beyond 12 was named one of the world's 10 most innovative education companies by Fast Company. Alex also currently serves on the Greater Oakland Public Schools team and on the board of advisors of Magnuson Center for Entrepreneurship at Dartmouth College. She provides insight into the ways high schools and colleges can better align their efforts to support student success and how to use technology and data to do just that. Please join me in welcoming Alexandra Bernadotte.
Hello, everyone. How are you? Doing well? Great. It is an honor to be here. So it wasn't a foregone conclusion that I would be standing on this stage, or any stage for that matter, as a college graduate, an advanced degree recipient, as a social entrepreneur who has created an organization that is impacting the lives of 50,000 plus first-generation college students, and as a dreamer who aspires to impact the lives of 1 million students by 2025. I am an immigrant. I am the first person in my family to graduate from college. I am a Pell Grant recipient, and English is my third language. I was born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and I grew up in inner city Boston. I was raised by my parents and my beloved grandmother, Mommy Claire, who, by the way, is still alive. She's 104 years old. Even though my parents didn't go to college, they stressed the importance of an education and a college degree in particular as key to moving me and our family out of poverty. One day when I was in the 7th grade, my mom came running home and she said, "Okay, I got it. You have to go to this thing called an Ivy League." But wait, you have to go to this thing called Dartmouth. She had written it down and she pronounced it phonetically. And that's how the dream of a specific college was born. It was through that overheard conversation in the emergency room of Carney Hospital in Dorchester, Massachusetts, where my mom worked as a phlebotomist. If that's where doctors were sending their kids, that's where you were gonna go. So I worked really hard in high school. I graduated at the top of my class. When those college acceptance letters started coming in, we were thrilled. And when the one from Dartmouth came, we treated the moment almost as if we had won the lottery, because we assumed that the most difficult part of the journey was behind us. As you can imagine, we were wrong. So I went to Dartmouth sight unseen. I had never been to a college campus before. I had never even been allowed to sleep over someone's house who wasn't family. We traveled to Hanover, New Hampshire, in what I like to call my caravan. We were 10 cars deep, including my mom, my dad, my younger sister, my grandmother, aunts, uncles, cousins. Because I was the first person to embark on this journey, we all wanted to be a part of it, right? It was our journey. As soon as that caravan left, things got a little tricky. I completely bombed my freshman year. Even though I had a resume that indicated incredible preparation, I struggled with every aspect of college life, from the academic and the financial to the social and the emotional. After the fall of my sophomore year, I was academically suspended and asked to take a leave of absence. With generations of sacrifice and my entire family's hopes and dreams hanging in the balance, I was in crisis. Luckily, after taking some time off, I was able to return to Dartmouth with a new game plan. I reached out to friends and peers. I discovered that I wasn't alone, that they too were struggling. With the support of my family, but most importantly, the support of 2 mentors who bound their lives to mine and said, "Not on my watch." I was able to turn things around. I regained my footing. I graduated from Dartmouth in 4 years, and I went to Stanford for graduate school. While my story has a happy ending, we know that it doesn't always end that way. Each year, hundreds of thousands, close to millions of students with backgrounds and stories similar to mine embark on their college journeys, believing like I did, that they are prepared for the road ahead. But the statistics tell us otherwise. I don't have to tell you what the statistics are, but I will. Only 9% of students from the lowest income quartile can expect to earn a bachelor's degree by their mid-20s versus 77% of their higher income peers. African American students earn bachelor's degrees at 1/2, and Latinx students at 1/3 the rate of white students. Students from homes where neither parent has earned a bachelor's degree are twice as likely to drop out before the start of their second year as a student with at least one college-educated parent. I founded Beyond 12 in 2010 to change those statistics. Working and operating at the intersection of K-12 and higher education, and working in partnership with high schools and colleges, our virtual near-peer coaching model, our campus-specific mobile app called My Coach, and our predictive and prescriptive back-end analytics engine has allowed us to provide coaching services to over 7,000 students since our founding. And we have collected and analyzed and synthesized data for 120,000 plus students across the country. And the work that we're doing, we're seeing early indicators of success. 85% of the students that we've coached for 4 years have either graduated or are still enrolled 6 years later. I'd like to introduce you to one of those students. This is Jasenia. Jasenia grew up in Oakland. Her parents are from Mexico. Like my parents, they didn't go to college. Jasenia's parents didn't go to high school. But like my parents, they stressed the importance of an education and a college degree for Jasenia and her siblings. So Jasenia worked hard in high school. She thrived at a charter school in Oakland. They celebrated her college acceptances as well. And she landed at one of her dream schools in San Francisco. Jasenia, too, had a very difficult transition from high school to college. She struggled, and after failing her remedial math class for the second time, she said, I think I'm done. I don't think I'm college material. Jasenia was working with a Beyond 12 college coach, Lilia, who had recently graduated herself. She was a first-generation college graduate, so she understood firsthand the challenges that Jasenia was facing on her road to earning a college degree. Lilia was her virtual coach, so they connected bi-weekly via text messaging, email, phone, Skype. And after years of working together, and because of Jasenia's hard work, Lilia's expert guidance, and their connection to the resources on her campus, Jasenia did earn her degree in 5 years. She graduated with a degree in child and adolescent development. Right after college, she got a job working as a preschool teacher, and now she's working on becoming a special education teacher. Do you notice the similarities between my story and Jasenia's story? What if I told you that there is a 23-year span between my matriculation to college and Jasenia's matriculation? Why are we still having these same conversations about equity? Why is it that despite the sweat equity that we are all putting in, that systemically we haven't been able to move our persistence in graduation rates, particularly for first-generation college students, and we haven't been able to decrease the gaps between our students who are traditionally underrepresented and their peers? I spent a lot of time thinking about this. So I've been asking myself that question. I've been asking our team that question. I've taken it on the road. I've asked our students that question. And I'm asking lots of folks in the field. I'd love to share a couple of insights that we've learned so far. So the first is that our students are creative, resourceful, and whole. So many of our programs start from a deficit model. We tell our students that they are low income, that they are high risk, We tell our students that they are underprepared, as if the fault lies with them and not with the education system that has consistently failed them throughout their lives. We don't appreciate the assets that they bring to our campuses. So rather than start from this deficit-based model, what if we acknowledge their perseverance and treated their persistence and everything that they brought to our campus as assets? The second lesson learned: our students do not experience their college as a linear path. They talk to us about experiencing college in modes. And if they are in an uncertain mode or a crisis mode, it doesn't happen whether that, if that moment happens. It doesn't matter if that moment happens in year 3 or year 4. They are just as close to the dropout line and just as vulnerable as if it happened in year 1. A lot of times we front load the support, believing that if we can just get them through the first semester or the first year that they will be okay. But what our students are telling us, that the game changer is not time, but it's comprehensive support from the entire institution, from the time that they matriculate until graduation and entry into the first job. The third, we're having this conversation. Is it humans? Is it technology? Will the robots replace the humans? Someone, when criticizing technology the other day, said, have you ever wondered why technologists and drug dealers are the only ones who call their customers users? It certainly made me think. Our students have told us that they need 3 different kinds of support: navigational, transactional, and inspirational. They've told us that we can automate the navigational and the transactional. They don't need a human for that. So let's reserve our humans for the support that is uniquely human. It's the inspirational. Am I college material? Do I belong here? I've just experienced this crisis. What does that mean in terms of my persistence or my ability to stay here? We need both, particularly if we're going to achieve equity at scale, right? Humans can't scale, but apps can't empathize. The last one, and probably the most profound one for me, and I'm going to pause and say that it's even more profound because last week I had the honor and the pleasure of visiting Montgomery, Alabama with our staff and our board. We had our staff and board retreat there. And I had the honor of attending Bryan Stevenson's Legacy Museum, from enslavement to mass incarceration, as well as the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. So as I was standing on those sacred grounds, as I walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the site of Bloody Sunday in 1965, this insight rang so true. Systems achieve the outcomes they are designed to achieve. For so long, I have been saying that our education system is broken and we need to fix it. Our system isn't broken. It was deliberately designed to ensure that power and influence remain the purview of a few. It was deliberately designed to ensure inequitable outcomes. It is not a mistake that at 38 of the most selective US colleges, more students come from the top 1% than from the entire bottom 60%. It is not a mistake that over the last 4 decades, that income for the top 1% of households has continued to rise, while it's remained stagnant for everybody else. This is inequity by design. So if we want to achieve equitable outcomes for all students, we have to do more than just educate students to thrive in our current system. We need to inspire them and provide them with the tools to critically look at our current systems, dismantle, and build new ones. I see my role as ensuring our students earn college degrees on the one hand, but ensuring that we are building architects for our new systems, our new education systems, our new criminal justice systems, our new economic systems, so that they can intentionally and deliberately design a system that achieves equitable outcomes for all students. I see my role now, and I'd like to invite you to see our role as moving beyond education for graduation and education for economic mobility, but rather education for liberation. At this stage, the question that I ask myself every day and that I'm going to ask you, what will you do? What more will you do to ensure equitable outcomes? What more will you do to close those college persistence and graduation gaps? What more can we do together? And I'd like to acknowledge the progress that we've made and the progress that everyone in this room has made already. But I would argue that it is not enough if we're not able to close those gaps. What more will you do so that in 23 years, one of our first generation college students isn't standing on this stage telling you their story, telling you her story, and reflecting on the fact that in 23 years, nothing has changed for our first generation college students? I would argue that equity is no longer just a moral imperative. My stance is that our country and our democracy depends on it. Thank you so much.
Cal State is educating for the future. We too are committed to making sure that our students are the architects of the future as we redesign all systems to make them equitable and have equitable outcomes. I wish to thank Alex. I really found your story inspiring, but also a wonderful example of someone who is thinking outside the box. We can all push ourselves to do more and do better, but it is equally important that the innovative actions that we take are backed by research or data indicating that they will have a demonstrable impact on student success. And that's why data-informed decision-making is one of the 6 pillars of Graduation Initiative 2025. We are focused on advancing the programs, initiatives, and processes that work, and rethinking the ones that don't. To talk more about the importance of research and data, please join me in welcoming author and editor Doug Letterman. And as an editor of one of the seminal higher education news organizations and a prolific education reporter, Doug speaks widely on C-SPAN, National Public Radio, and at meetings around the country. He has won 3 national awards for education reporting from the Education Writers Association, including one in 2009 for a series he co-wrote on college rankings. Please welcome to the stage Doug Letterman.
Great to be here. Thank you very much for having me. Really a privilege. Not all that thrilled to have followed Alex up here. I have 0 personal story to share, so I'm gonna sort of take it up a couple of notches, not in compellingness, but in the level. And we're sort of maybe move up to 25 or 30,000 feet. And I'm going to talk a little bit, I mean, there are a lot of things that were nice lead-ins to this. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of why, I'm going to try to answer a little bit the question of why change is so hard to bring about in higher education. Well, let me start by saying, so it is easy to read the headlines or to listen to Silicon Valley pundits 100 miles or so from here and assume that the value of a degree is tanking and that higher education is badly broken. I don't actually buy that. The post-secondary education and training is more important than it's ever been, and we need more Americans participating, not fewer. As the economy changes, as society changes faster, I think, than it's ever changed before. And that's a big job, and everybody is needed. Everybody in this room is needed. Everybody in higher education is needed. So that's why I don't think the sort of the stories about sort of the lack of value of higher education are legit. But, and you knew there was a but coming, there is a serious set of problems. And higher education sort of has to change, particularly traditional colleges and universities have to change in pretty fundamental ways if they're going to play the role that they need to play in that big job. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to try and lay out some of the forces that are putting pressure on higher education to adapt, some of the impediments and some of the opportunities that lay ahead. And I'm going to close by talking about something that I hope doesn't change about higher education as institutions navigate down this road. So let's start by talking about sort of why change is needed. I'm going to start with what you might describe as sort of the positive reason, which is what I was just talking about, the demand. We need more people educated than we've ever had. We need more people getting some kind of post-high school education and training. And we're going to need to keep training and educating people in terms of reskilling throughout their lives in a way that's truer than it has ever been. And per sort of some of the issues that Alex raised, we have to do a much better job educating those in our society who have historically been ill-served by higher education, especially at a time when they are becoming a greater and greater proportion of the population. So there's a very big job to do for the economy, for individuals, for society, and it's all hands on deck. So it's a good thing when people think what you do is in demand. So that's a positive reason for change. The others are a little less so. The first one is economic. While there continue to be politicians and philanthropies and funders, donors who might continue to want to invest in higher education, and California is fortunate on the first front to have been having politicians and Governor Newsom, who's speaking here tomorrow, supports higher education in ways that lots of other states don't. And so I think we have very much entered a period in which most colleges and universities are going to be operating in an era of constrained resources. And that means that the typical way that colleges have strived to do more is typically by spending more on people, on all sorts of things. And I think that's going to be difficult, I think, because of that constrained resource. And obviously everybody can advocate, but I think the way society is set up right now, I don't see that as being terrifically likely, which means the colleges have to work smarter and change how they define increasing their impact. And we can talk a little bit later about what that means. Secondly, this is happening at a time where there are growing doubts about the value of higher education and of degrees. And we can talk about all sorts of reasons for that and whether they're fair or not, but it is where we are, and I think it makes it an uphill climb. There also is, part of the reason I think that doubt has risen is because of what has historically been a difficulty that higher education has. We are in an era of evidence and proof of performance and of efficacy. And I'll talk a little bit later about how surprisingly bad higher education is at responding to that. But basically right now we are not, the case is not being made, and that's going to be that creates real headwinds for this. And lastly, the other reason change is needed is because there are more alternatives to higher education. And if I had to bet on traditional colleges and universities or the new, current and growing group of alternative providers to who's going to survive or do best, I'd still bet on higher education, but there are going to be winners and losers in both groups. And it is going to be, colleges are going to have to do more and fight harder to remain as relevant to the funders, to businesses, and to students. It's at the individual and funder level. So what needs to change? And this is, I wouldn't dare to tell you all what needs to change here. The answer of sort of what needs to change is really a localized and sort of situational decision. But there are some things, and again, I try to bring a national perspective to this. There are some things that we've seen, and Alex just pointed out that it's not brand new that we've been talking about student success, but and this event is evidence that this is that we are making the shift from access to access plus success. But I think it's fair to say that nationally there's a lot more rhetoric about student success than there is behavior and behavioral change. The other thing that I think we haven't seen yet is a big shift from this idea that this is a unit's job, the student services job, or the academic affairs department, to an institution-wide job, and that is the biggest challenge when it comes to the faculty. The faculty at many places has not historically believed that once a student leaves the course or the program, that outcome is the faculty member's fault. And there's maybe plenty of blame to go around, but this is an institutional problem and an organizational problem. It's about rewards for institutions and rewards for individuals within that ecosystem. The impediments to change. The decentralized nature of higher education has been a historic strength. While sitting in front of me, and this, Cal State is obviously an example of a system within a larger ecosystem, but we do not have a system of higher education. We have 3,000 largely independent operators. Again, there are some systems within it. But the reason but by and large, when you look at certainly almost all the private institutions and many publics and community colleges, these entities do not operate in unity, in direction. Now that's been a historic plus, I think, compared to other countries, because we don't have there are other countries where a government says, let's go this way, and everybody goes. That's the way, but I don't think anybody really thinks that's the best way. And I think this has helped higher education to not operate this way. But I think it's becoming a disadvantage. It is very difficult to get systemic movement in a non-system. I said before that I was going to talk about sort of why it is bizarre, truly bizarre, that higher education is as bad at, given that we're in this era of evidence, it is stunning how bad higher education is at this. It's bad. It's surprising because this is an enterprise built on the scientific method, on trial and error, and yet that prism has been too rarely applied to the institution's behavior itself. And I think that's part of why. Now listen, I'm not saying that if higher education just did a better job that the proof exists to make the case that higher education is effective. But we haven't even tried in general. It's obviously changing, and there is a lot more work at this. I'm obviously speaking in broad generalities, but we are in part in a situation in which people are doubting the efficacy of higher education because higher education hasn't been used to being asked and hasn't developed the mechanisms for measuring itself and then reflecting that outward. And that's just got to change. The last sort of impediment is complacency. You can use lots of words for it, inertia. I believe that most of us as individuals do not change unless and until we have to. There are obviously individual people who can lead institutions or who set out and get ahead of the pack. But as a whole, I do not believe that most of us change individually until we have to. And so it's sort of not surprising that our organizations operate the same way. And especially when things have been sort of working. Now, again, those data that Alex provided, which you all know so well about sort of we have terrible equity gaps so higher education hasn't been working for everybody, But if you've had enough people coming through the door and the impetus to change, I mean, that's a partial answer to Alex's question about why we're still having certain conversations. I don't think most institutions have felt enough pain to have to change. I think that's starting to change. And I don't wish it on anybody, but I think that may be where we are. The opportunities for change. Innovation and technology, we're going to talk about that some later. I'm not, as shown by my initial comment about Silicon Valley, I'm not a big fan of the view that technology is the savior or is the end-all or be-all of higher education, but it is absolutely a possible tool. I think what Alex said near the end was just right, figuring out how to use technology to expand the reach of the human beings and give higher education more reach to more students and more effectively has to be a part of the mix, and it's going to be. The other big element of the sort of injection of the digital world into higher education is the possibility of learning much more, gleaning data that tell us much, much more about how our students learn, so to enable us to personalize and to target help and support to those who need it most in the ways they need it most. The other opportunity for change, which I'll add, thought of it after I sent the presentation in, was about this collective behavior, the lack of a system. And again, applaud Cal State for sort of marshaling the resources it has to sort of push in certain directions. But we don't have that broadly within higher education, and that's a problem. And I am starting to see some new organizations and new structures crop up that have the potential to sort of be mission-oriented and to drive to sort of collective action, collective behavior. And I think that's got to be part of the future, much more than it has been. Very few institutions are going to be able to afford to be islands unto themselves going forward, and either to continue to do what they've been doing or certainly to be better and stronger. I'm going to close by talking a little bit about what shouldn't change. The focus on helping students get jobs and be prepared for careers. Listen, we know from student data that's why most of today's students are seeking a post-secondary education, and it's hugely important. It's got to be, but I want to make sure that as we respect that and push in that direction, that we don't forget that that's not all that a higher education is about. Done right, higher education is also about helping people have a better life broadly. And I do worry that at times that the push to measure higher education by very narrow vocational outcomes leaves that out. And that's part of why I think it's so incumbent on colleges together to define what they believe they're striving for and how they're going to improve it. And because honestly, if it's left to the politicians, it's going to be a disaster. And it will leave out some of those things that I think are most important. The higher education in America hallmark has been that it has been, even professional education has had a liberal education wrapping, and it's been at the core. And I want to make sure that we don't lose that. My time is up. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and look forward to the next conversation.
Through the graduation initiative, we are definitely demonstrating collaborative action and coalition building that is creating systemic change in the Cal State. And I could not agree with Doug more. So thank you, Doug, for that inspiring. It's clear that higher education is changing. We know that. We like to think we're leading the way, and what we're doing with Graduation Initiative will encourage other states and other systems and institutions to follow. Our work with Graduation Initiative 2025 is evidence that we are heeding a clarion call, re-engineering higher education while maintaining the tradition of liberal arts education. Finally, we turn our focus to the end results. The success of our graduates in the workforce. Are they prepared? What more could we do to promote their continued success? Our third and final speaker, a former English professor and experienced innovator at the intersection of education, the workforce, and technology, will have some thoughts on this topic. Michelle R. Weiss is Senior Vice President of Workforce Strategies and Chief Innovation Officer with Strata Education Network, a national nonprofit dedicated to strengthening the pathways between education and employment. Michelle leads the organization's workforce alignment initiatives and provides insight into the connection between college student learning and post-grad employment. She co-authored the book Higher Education, that's H-I-R-E education, Mastery, Modularization, and the Workforce Revolution, while serving as the Senior Research Fellow in Higher Education at the Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Dr. Michelle Weiss.
Good afternoon. All right, you've made it. Almost there. One of the most popular team building, design thinking activities is this thing called the Marshmallow Challenge. And you take 20 sticks of spaghetti, a little bit of twine, give groups a little bit of masking tape, sometimes a pair of scissors, and a marshmallow. And you give teams a very short amount of time to build the tallest tower they can. But on top of that tower, in order to win, you have to place your marshmallow. Funnily enough, and they've done studies on this, some of the worst performers on this challenge are business school students. They spend a lot of time orienting around the problem, analyzing the problem, and vying for control. And then, as time starts to run out, they hastily begin to build their tower as tall as they can, and at the very last second, they try to put the marshmallow on the top. And of course, these structures fall. The people who do the best at this challenge are kids, kindergartners. And the reason why is because they immediately begin prototyping. They start building small structures, putting the marshmallow on top, seeing how they fall, iterating, prototyping, build again. And when it comes to the future of learning and work, I fear that we are a little bit more like the business school students. We tend to orient around the problem quite a bit. And part of the challenge is that we're faced with a lot of data like this. So take a look at the leftmost line and the rightmost line, okay? These are just demonstrating the different kinds of adoption curves we have as it comes to how technology has changed our lives. On the leftmost side, you are looking at the adoption curve for the analog telephone. It took approximately 75 years in the US for the analog telephone to be adopted by 50% of our US population. That rightmost line shows you the adoption curve of the mobile phone. In less than 10 years, the mobile phone hit 76% of the global population, right? And so when you feel like the velocity of technological change feels different today, it is because it is different. You are feeling that velocity. And this is what people talk about when they talk about exponential futures, right? It's this idea that we have been observing Moore's law happen, which is the doubling of the rate of doubling our computing power every 18 months or 2 years. In fact, since the 1890s, we've actually seen a trillion-fold increase in the rate of computing power, in the power that we hold. At the same time, we have all these kinds of projections out there that anywhere from 8 to 47% of our US workforce is at risk of automation. That's a huge gamut, right? There's great uncertainty about what all this technology means. How do we think about the impact of automation and machine learning or deep learning, right? And how do we think about preparing people for all these jobs that don't even exist today? We can already sense that the future of learning is going to feel different because we're seeing our learners change right in front of our eyes. right? This whole idea of the non-traditional learner has just become moot. Most of our learners, most of our college-going population, in fact, 70%, over 70% of them, fit into the descriptor of a non-traditional student. They are stitching together multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet, or they're working full-time. They have families, they have caregiving responsibilities, they are tied to a geographic region. They have a lot of life that gets in the way of their pursuit of learning. Then we have to square that kind of data with what we hear from experts on aging and longevity and futurists who keep claiming that the first people to live to be 150 years old have already been born. Let's just sit on that for one moment. Does that mean our work lives are going to become 80 or 100 years long? Right? Suddenly, the idea of some sort of linear path from education to work and retirement seems deeply inadequate, as does the idea that somehow 2, 4, or 6 years of learning on the front end of a 100-year work life, that just doesn't seem to hold. How in the world are we going to navigate multiple transitions? We already know from data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that even early baby boomers are experiencing 12 job transitions by the time they retire. We can only extrapolate how many more job transitions we can all expect to navigate in the future, right? That number will only increase with time. But then we think about the systems that we have at our disposal, right? Our current education and workforce training systems are ill-suited to necessarily take us into the workforce of 2030 or 2040 and navigate those 15 to 20 transitions that maybe we might have to expect. The systems are brittle, they are rigid. We don't have a lot of on and off ramps available. In fact, in college, we generally have one, right? If you take an off ramp, you stop out of college, you are stigmatized as a dropout, and then you're punished further with some student loan debt. When you take an off-ramp out of your work life, that gap in your resume looks strange and questionable to your future employer, right? Why had that person not been employed during this period of time? We don't facilitate a lot of seamless movement in and out of learning and work. And yet we somehow have to imagine a post-secondary education and training system that can serve more like a variety of on and off ramps for that future. But how in the world are we going to do that when we fail to launch even that first transition for our learners when it comes to the handoff between education and career? So a lot of you have probably heard about this phenomenon of underemployment, right? And we tend to see sometimes these stories about newly minted grads going and working as baristas at Starbucks or selling clothes at their local retailer, at a Target or a Gap, and we tend to think that's just a small minority of students, not a big deal. Underemployment is a short-term problem. People will find their footing soon, right? Then they'll be off to the races with their careers. We took a look at 4 million unique resumes over 10-year periods. And we found that, in general, approximately 43% of that population starts off underemployed in their first job, meaning that they are in a job that never really required a college credential in the first place. That number in itself is not that startling. It actually aligns fairly closely with some Fed data out there. What was really startling to find was that once you started off underemployed, you were 5 times more likely to remain underemployed 5 years out. And 75% of that population actually remained underemployed 10 years out. So underemployment is not necessarily a short-term problem. It's not a blip on the radar. It can be a permanent detour with long-term ramifications, and not just financial, although the financial ramifications are quite large too, because on average, underemployed graduates are earning approximately $10,000 less per year than they could be. But it's more important to think about the social capital that they are losing out on. They are not building a professional network to help them make progress in their lives so that they can navigate those 15, 20, 25 transitions in the future. And so then you have different policymakers and employers and educators fighting about, okay, well then how best do we prepare our learners for this future of work? What are the skills that they need? And a lot of the literature on the future of work tends to kind of come to this head of, we need to be preparing our learners to cultivate their uniquely human skills to complement and coordinate better with the robots of the future. And it makes intuitive sense, right? That in certain cases, they're just things we need to relinquish to the computers because they will do them better and faster than we can. And so it makes sense that we might want to rely on things like our empathy, our emotional intelligence, our complex critical thinking, our creativity, our collaboration and teamwork. It makes sense. But human skills, we have lots of different words for them. We tend to call them soft skills, interpersonal skills, baseline skills, workforce competencies. It makes sense, but human skills alone are not necessarily enough. We do see from the data that employers are very much signaling that they do need these skills. So this is just a look at, with our affiliate MZ, we looked at 36 million job postings in just the first 6 months of 2018. And we found that the most common skills in demand in job postings data were in fact those human skills like communications and leadership, problem solving. But the other part of this is it's not just human alone, it's human plus. It's human plus a little bit of technical expertise. It's not either or, it's not hard or soft skills, it's not humanities versus the STEM skills. It is a little bit of emotional intelligence mixed with a little bit of artificial intelligence. So to give you a sample of this, even for someone thinking about going into journalism, you would think that in order to succeed and get a good job in journalism, you need to be a great writer, right, and communicate well. What a lot of our grads, our learners may not know right now is that if they are thinking about going down this path, they better be prepared to look at a field that looks a whole lot more like an IT field. They need to have a grasp of Google Analytics and SEO or search engine optimization. They need to understand how to use data visualization tools like Tableau. They have to have a little bit of a grasp of JavaScript. This shows you the enormity of demand for these sorts of skills today. And these aren't necessarily skills that can be learned right before you graduate. Some of these need to be embedded much earlier on. So again, it's a similar idea, of the T-shaped learner, which was popularized in the 1990s. Broad, sort of conceptual knowledge with a little bit of technical expertise. But as we face this future of learning and work, we have to realize that that alone is also not going to be sufficient. We are going to have to harness the power of education over and over and over again throughout our working lives. Education is not that one and done experience experienced on the front end of our longer work lives. And we have to think about how are we going to actually facilitate these very smooth transitions for us in that future that we are going to be confronting, right? We pay a lot of lip service to this concept of lifelong learning. We agree with it conceptually, but we need a new investment thesis. We need to actually invest in the systems and the infrastructure and the architecture to help us move in and out of learning and work. Because what is happening is we are already leaving behind a huge swath of our American population. Today we have 44 million Americans who are working age, they are jobless or underemployed, they are not thriving in the labor market, they are not earning a living wage, they are earning less than $35,000 per year as an individual or less than $70,000 for a family of 4. And we are leaving them behind, and what is really striking is that these learners who have only a high school degree and no post-secondary are 50% more likely to live in poverty than those with a little bit of post-secondary training. And the effects are huge in terms of generational effects. Because from MacArthur Genius Award winner Raj Chetty's work, we know that only 2 out of 25 children who are born into low-income households actually make it to the top rungs of the economic ladder. But he also tells us through his research that if we were to do more to uplift more women, more minorities and children from low-income families, we could actually quadruple the innovation rate in the United States. So we could have a society that would flourish. We know that the future is already here, but it is unevenly distributed, right? And so we have to begin prototyping toward that virtuous cycle of learning and work, right? We cannot, the future is here, but we cannot include clinging to the status quo as part of how we move forward. We have spent enough time admiring the problem. It is time to build. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Weiss. I'm late getting out because I was taking copious notes back there. And I will say that one thing that really struck me is Chancellor White asked us to really think about 3 things that we can take with us from our time today and tomorrow. And 2 things that really stuck with me is how can we create more on and off ramps for the students we have who we already know are non-traditional in their approach to learning. The second was really thinking about ways that we can develop digital competencies across the curriculum, very much like Alexandra said, like Doug said, Michelle emphasized, and certainly Michael Sorrell said at lunchtime. So at this time, I wish to say this, that gosh, what a wealth of experience and knowledge our 3 speakers brought to us today. All 3 have given us so much to think about in the context of our own campuses' student success efforts. And at this time, I'd like to invite all of our speakers to continue the conversation. So, Ms. Bernadotte, Mr. Letterman, Dr. Weiss, will you please join me on stage? And let's give them another round of applause. We're now going to open the Grad Talks up to all of you for thoughts, questions, and conversation. Please feel free to raise your hands, and a microphone will be brought to you. And allow me, I will begin with the first question. But a reminder to the audience, you will see staff and microphones moving throughout to ensure those who are live streaming are able to hear your question. Please stand up and use the microphone. That will help us out tremendously. The first question I have is, how can we leverage technology and data to better support students to and through college?
Go for it.
Okay. I'm happy to start. I touched on this a little bit, and I think all of us have touched on this in various ways. The recognition is that technology is not a panacea, right? It's not sort of an end in and of itself. I think technology allows you to do a couple of things. The first is it allows you to reach more students, right? It allows you to reach students geographically who may not be in close proximity to our education institutions. I think the second thing is this technology allows you to amplify human support. So one of the things that we've discovered, when you have a caseload of hundreds and hundreds of students, it's very difficult for you to take a step back and recognize patterns. So the pattern recognition, right, that a platform allows you to do, and the pattern recognition that you can do with large sets of data in terms of recognizing what are the trends, you know, at each of your institutions, and what are ways that we might be able to do that. I think the last thing, we talk a lot about predictive analytics, right, and being able to use data to help us predict which students need our help and when. We don't talk enough about the prescriptive part of the analytics pieces, right? So the so what of the data. So it's great that we have lots of data, but what do we do with it? And how do we help provide better support and better services for our students to help them get in and then through? So it's really the next piece of the data analytics. How do we use the data to help us make better decisions about how to support students on their road to and through?
Great, thanks, Alex. Dr. Weiss?
Oh, yeah, I think the thing that comes to mind is if you guys think about your Amazon pages, when you open up the homepage for Amazon, every single one of ours looks different. Because every 30 seconds, they are running an RCT on us, a randomized controlled trial on us. And they're doing this rapid prototyping and testing every 30 seconds on us. And so what's fascinating as you think about just that marketplace is that what they are able to do is they're able to close their data loop in terms of having every single click that we make be registered and understood to help make recommendations and help them understand our consumer behavior. We actually have none of those capabilities in our higher education and workforce systems. We have data. We have actually no ways of actually integrating that data and making it speak the same language. So even in an institution, you have approximately 1,000 to 1,500 different systems, legacy and new, that do not speak to one another, right? And there is no ability to access real-time data. And so that, I think, is the fundamental challenge we face as we try to do better, is trying to understand how we think about sort of the root system of a lot of the work that we have to do. And I think the ecosystem metaphor is powerful in that regard, because as you think about just a forest, right, and you think about the root system underneath, trees actually feed each other and they send information to one another. They send nutrients, they protect one another through that root system. We have none of that. And so it's core to everything we think about as we build for the future.
Great, thank you. Doug?
Well, these two are both experts on that, and while I oversee our coverage of technology in higher education, I'm also I'm wary of it, not because I don't think you can add enormous contribution, but because of a lot of how the language is used in higher education, and. We're about to publish our next iteration of our faculty survey, of attitudes of faculty survey about technology, and it's not surprising that a lot of faculty members are pretty suspicious. And that's partly because of the language that the administrators use about technology. When you say that you're going to reduce the costs of educating students, the main way that one wrings costs out of systems is by getting rid of people. So that sort of idea of a robot tutor in the sky scares the heck out of faculty members who think their jobs are going to disappear. So if you're going to talk as an administrator about technology, talk about it expanding your reach or driving down the cost per student because you're going to reach, because you're going to expand the reach of the students, or you're going to allow you to reach more students because you're going to help the tutors and the other people focus on the human part. But I think and I think we're starting to see some change in that, but I think part of the reason why technology is sort of feared in parts of higher education is because of how it's been described by technology companies and by administrators who are promoting them.
Very good. Thank you all. Question from the audience? Yes, and wait for the mic, please.
It's coming behind you.
It's coming.
Thank you, Trustee Wong.
It's also just really nice to see that there are actually people out here with the lights. It's
I know.
President Hutchinson, I would love the panel, and thank you so much for all of your presentations are really informative, but I would like to know your opinion on a proposal that the CSU is discussing about quantitative reasoning. So would really like to know your opinions.
Thank you.
What is it?
Yeah,
What do you guys
Would you like to explain what it is?
Yeah, seriously. So we wrote about it. Not smart for journalists to offer opinions about live public policy decisions. It's not typically in our wheelhouse. I truly get the reasoning behind it, and I understand the concerns. It is really interesting to see institutions try to do things, and systems try to do things that they believe will help students succeed better. I mean, this is not science. I mean, well, there is hopefully some science behind it, but this is much of this is not. There's some risk in all these decisions, and the fact that there's such division about this.
And I will say that I think our panel is reserved on answering that question because it is a live policy issue at this time. Yeah. For those of you who may not know, it's really looking at adding a fourth year in the grades, middle school through 12th grade, a fourth year of quantitative reasoning before students come to college in terms of helping them be college ready. And it is a policy, I think, in discussion at the moment. So I appreciate the question, and I think it's okay to move on. Okay. Another question. Trustee Sebelius. Oh, wait, I have a question here. Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you. And first, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. My question is, what do historical and current political trends signal for the future of college students?
Say it one more time, please.
What do historical and current political trends signal for the future of college students?
Political trends in the U.S., I assume we're talking about.
Yes, so we'll limit our conversation to the U.S.
I think one thing to note, and this is something that's been kind of backed up with Pew and Gallup data, is that both sides are questioning and increasing their distrust of the value of higher education. I think that is clear. And part of that is just because we're in this perfect storm of rising college costs. And then we have this growing inequality and the stagnancy in the labor market. So I think the challenge ahead, and this is something we wrote about in our report, Robot Ready, where we talk about, we use the case example of the liberal arts just to sort of help us understand, because there's so much written about, especially from a policy perspective, that tends to dump on the liberal arts as a valueless, lack of ROI pathway to go. But it's fascinating to see when you actually look at the future of work literature that the demand for these liberal arts competencies are increasing in demand, right? And the challenge that we face is that educators and employers, they value these same outcomes. They have very different ways of talking about it. They have no common language. And learners have no idea how to translate their skills from education into the language of the labor market. And that's part of the reason why some of that data that I showed you on journalism we did is to understand actually what skills are they learning and how are they translating their skills into the labor market. We cannot continue to tell learners that they will see their ROI in 20 years, that it will be worth it. What we need to show them is here are the top 5 or 10 pathways you can expect when you major in these degrees, right? And we now have all that data. We know the top 5, 10 pathways for most liberal arts majors. We know the kinds of skills that they build along the way in order to get to a high wage, high demand, high skill career by their 3rd job. We have all this data, we don't help our learners. And so part of that work is a liberal arts education is extremely valuable. It is on the decline right now. More people are moving towards business, healthcare, and STEM fields. And that's a problem if we think about this increasing demand for those skills. But part of the work that needs to be done, again, is not clinging to the way things have always been and liberal arts education will thrive no matter what. It is a matter of actually doing something different to help learners understand how they translate those skills better in that first job even.
Thank you, I appreciate that comment.
Yeah,
Alex?
no, I am hearing the increased rhetoric, right? Like, is college for everyone? And obviously, given the work that I do, I'm asked that question with a lot of frequency, often in rooms full of folks who already have college degrees, right? In rooms full of folks. So often.
Who are going to send their kids there.
Who are going to send. And who sometimes are breaking the law to send their kids there. But I digress. And so I often start with the question, do you have a college degree, right? Like whenever we launch into these conversations. And the interesting thing is that there is definitely bipartisan support for apprenticeship programs and alternative pathways, but the same sort of the same research and the same surveys, when you ask folks, well, what would you want for the children in your life, right? Like over 50% still say that it's a college education, right, and a 4-year college degree. So I think that there's a disconnect between what we want for our own children and what we want for other people's children. And so in that kind of political narrative, I think it's increasingly important for us to recognize the challenges of our current higher education system, but also recognize that, particularly for the students that I serve, it is still a proven path out of poverty for many, many of our students. And I think it's dangerous rhetoric for us to continue to have these conversations without the voices of those who are living the alternative.
A couple of quick thoughts. I think we maybe. I don't know if it's true that we should be throwing out pretty much all the historical political trends, but it sort of feels that way right now. So I'm not sure how much that can guide us. I also don't think politicians have the answers in general. They are bigger and bigger investors in many cases, especially at the federal government, which is why the questions are coming harder and heavier than they have been in the past. And I think that's a reasonable response, but God knows the politicians don't have the answer to how to control costs in higher education. They've tried multiple times, they don't have a clue. They don't really know how to measure quality or outcomes, and that's part of my view is that if we leave those questions to be answered by the politicians, it will be a catastrophe. And so that's where it's got to come, I think, from you. And I do believe higher education has been a little negligent in not looking inside and putting forward those definitions and saying, this is what we believe we do, this is what we deliver to our graduates, and here's how we're going to prove it. That, to me, is the challenge. The politicians don't have an answer. Part of why they can't pass a Higher Education Act 5-7 years after it should have been. I mean, it's just the answers are not going to come, I don't think, through political policy.
Thank you. I know Trustee Sebelius has a question. Great, we have a microphone.
Hello, my name is Romy Zabalius. I'm a faculty member, and I'm from Europe. I lived in Latin America, and Asia, and Australia, and Europe, and now, of course, in the United States. And my question is why? Why do we as educational institutions have to prove our value? Why do we have to explain what the value of education is? Can you imagine a conference of doctors here and people standing here and explaining why it's good to be healthy? Isn't it self-explanatory? I really don't get it. And when we try to knee-jerk come up with data at which we were told we are so bad about at proving what we deliver, when we do this, we fail. Because what can we do? We can show how many students we graduate, how fast we graduate, how much money they earn. And this is all measured in money, how we supply the workforce. Everything that education is all about, we cannot measure. These are intangible values. Leadership. What, you get a 5.2 in leadership? In empathy, you get a 17.4. How do we measure those things? How do we measure self-realization, right? Community, right? These are things we cannot measure, and only in the United States am I asked, what is the value of education? Is it really worth it? Look, there's this saying, I don't like to get old, but I don't like the alternative. Well, you know, education is expensive and it's hard, but I definitely don't like the alternative. So if you have an answer, my question is, how do we sensibly measure the value of education? I think the moment we do, we are bound to fail. We cannot measure these intangible values that we instill in our students.
So thank you. So two questions, I think. One is just thinking historically about where did the trend begin where I think our politicians, legislatures were really asking for more assessment and accountability in higher education. And then secondly, to your point, and can we really measure the importance of higher education or education in general for the future?
You look like you're ready.
Well, I'm glad you were able to tease questions out of that. So a couple thoughts. Well, to answer the first question, it happened when higher education made a deal with the devil, with the federal government, a long time ago, and sort of the federal government outsourced to the accrediting agencies, which were bodies of colleges, to measure quality in exchange for what are now $120 billion in federal financial aid that the federal government spends on, which excludes the research money, excludes the workforce investment money. The federal government is spending lots of money. Now, listen, if you're asking me, do I believe deeply in, I sent 2 kids to liberal arts colleges. I believe deeply in those things. And I think they are hard to measure, but, and I don't want to get into a global political argument, but higher education is not doing so great in some of those other countries where the government is funding it all. Britain is headed in the US direction of increasingly requiring students to pay because government is pulling back. So higher education is expensive, and I think it's a, if you require, I'm trying to think of how to say this politely. I don't think it's reasonable first of all, I actually think some of those things are measurable. If higher education, if colleges say our students, by coming through our institutions, people are better citizens, what rate do they vote at compared to non-college students? Mm-hmm. We create values. How much do they, and I'm not saying everything can be measured. I'm really not. Yeah. But I don't think higher education can get by and as it has for a lot of decades, just saying, trust us, we're good.
So,
I agree.
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Lumina actually has this great report on just a litany of indirect, non-economic benefits to a college degree. But so there are ways of measuring this in really unique ways. But I think one of my favorite books that I've just recently read is David Epstein's Range. I don't know if you guys have seen that.
David was our first reporter.
Really? Oh, it's an incredible book, and it talks about how generalists can increasingly thrive in a growing specialized world. And he points over and over and over again to the ways in which some of the most incredible innovators and problem solvers are people who can really use analogical thinking in terms of being able to take domain expertise from something that seems entirely unrelated to the problem that they are trying to solve and use it to solve that problem. I do not believe that we in higher ed do a great job of teaching learners how to transfer from one domain to another because of it's just part of the way in which we are scaffolded. We are segmented into little fiefdoms of departments, right? And we at most, when we think about interdisciplinarity, it's this kind of cross-discipline of cross-listing courses, right? There's not a lot of incentives that are aligned with promotion processes that incentivize teachers to collaborate with one another, to co-author with one another. And so the thing that is something so striking is these engineering programs that are coming out of the National Academies of Engineering on these grand challenges, right? Teaching learners how to solve huge issues like how do you bring clean water to areas that need it the most? How do you capture solar energy more efficiently? And doing this in a way where you blow down, you de-silo completely and you tackle a major real world problem with real interdepartmental and interdisciplinarity. And so that's where I feel like, and it doesn't have to be for engineering, we have to do this for more and more of our disciplines. We need to think about how do we engage learners and help them really do that problem-based learning and understand just in time how they then understand these different concepts in different domains, instead of sort of thinking that you learn how to solve a problem in math over here, which is unrelated to this problem in chemistry or physics or anthropology over here. How do we do a better job of weaving those together? I think that's something that is low-hanging fruit for us to think about as we encounter more and more wicked problems, which is what David Epstein talks about. In order to problem solve those increasingly wicked problems, we need to be able to do that transfer across domain, and I think that's the work that we could do better.
Thank you. I find that extremely helpful. Thank you. Let's have it. See questions over here in the second row.
Hi, Lillian Kimball. I'm a trustee. I had a comment and a question, but first to Dr. Weiss. You mentioned that increasingly there are more untraditional learners, but you also said that for the jobs of the future that don't exist yet, it sounds as though you're saying we're all going to be non-traditional learners, because none of us are going to be trained for one job. Even at whatever age we're at, we will be going in and out, taking those off-ramps. So I'm wondering how you envision that we do that, what kinds of things will be out there, whether they'll be online tools or internships for the elderly who are still working, who are going to live to be, 150 years old. God help us. So that was one question for you, and then for the rest of you, I as a trustee, I read, I do my homework, and I often feel I'm drowning in information and data. And I recently was reading a book actually about over-medicalization, and the author had a very interesting take. He divides it as data, information, useful knowledge, and finally wisdom, as a way to look at all this data that's coming about through Moore's Law, where we're just absolutely inundated. And I'm just wondering if each one of you can sort of, not to put you in the spot, but give us a concrete bit of wisdom, because you've all studied different things and have different experiences that can help us move forward with this incredible institution, the CSU.
Thank you, Trustee Kimball.
I don't think I have any wisdom. Go ahead.
I don't have wisdom, but
Wisdom?
The thing that we try to think about as we think about envisioning this new learning ecosystem, which you're right, all of us are going to need to rely upon, is that we believe that there are 5 core elements that are foundational to building a better functioning and healthier learning ecosystem. And so from the perspective of the learner, it has to show us, it has to help us pay, it has to help us learn, it has to endorse us, and it has to hire us. And so what I mean by show me is a navigation piece where we need better assessments and tools and resources for us to understand when I, as a 45-year-old male truck driver who's been doing this for 20 years and is suddenly seeing his job become obsolete, how do I understand all the capabilities and assets that I bring to bear with that 20 years of experience? None of it is codified in any sort of formal credential, but I have lots of hidden skills and credentials, and I've been caring for my elderly mother with Alzheimer's, right? I have a lot of capabilities that don't register typically. And how do I understand with those skills different sorts of adjacent domains that I might want to transfer some of those skills and fill gaps in order to get to where I want to go? And how do I understand that maybe I'm 30% of the way there towards being an HR manager and 60% of the way there towards being a project manager, but I just have no idea. I can only think of this one thing that one of my friends has told me about, right? We need better ways of envisioning and thinking about a kind of education GPS that gets us there. Helping us pay, right now if we think about the $160 billion of federal financial aid, it is much more geared toward the younger college-going student. 70 billion of our employer formal training, 58% of that is going to bachelor's degree workers. Only 17% goes to people with a high school degree. So again, we have to sort of think about different sorts of funding mechanisms, income share agreements, portable benefits, so that I can take a risk and pursue learning. And then you need precise education. Sometimes more college or more graduate school is not the answer. Sometimes it's going to be that boot camp or some sort of alternative learning provider or a cluster of competencies here plus a MOOC there. I need a way to find and navigate my way through that, right? And I also need the right kinds of human and tech-enabled 360-degree supports to get me there, because I failed out of college many times before and now I have kids to take care of. How am I going to stay accountable? How am I going to find childcare, transportation? That's that sort of help me learn piece. And then I need to make sure that as I take that, it's going to be understood by an employer, that this signal is going to mean something, that it's not just something that I'm taking and I'm wasting my money on, but it'll give an employer the understanding that they can take a chance on me and hire me. So those are sort of like the 5 elements that I think are critical to solving for. And as we think about building more and more of those on and off ramps for the future, those are the 5 core elements that we see as critical.
So one of the things I guess that's important to say in all this is that the goalposts have moved. We, society, are expecting so much more from these institutions than they ever have. And that's part of why, it's kind of, I find myself, when I talk to higher ed audiences, when I talk to audiences of corporate tech people and all that, I'm defending higher ed to the hilt. And because I think and to business leaders who say, you're not giving us the graduates with the skills we need, I say, well, that's because you keep moving the goalposts and you stop doing the training yourself and all sorts of things. So I do think it's important when I'm talking to a higher ed audience to acknowledge that what is being asked of you to provide mental health coverage and care and child care and emergency grants so people can get can fix their tire, can fix their car, let alone making sure that people are prepared for jobs. Now, so again, it is not surprising that higher ed is struggling under the weight of all this. This is an enormous set of obligations, some of which are pretty recently added to your plate. So I guess I would say, those who say, why, that's why I don't think the system is broken. I think it's struggling with a lot of new things, and so I guess it's just, I just wanted to make clear, because I clearly have alienated at least one of your trustees, that this is not a blame game. This is not a, I think a lot is being expected, some of it reasonable, some of it not, and frankly, you just got to deal with the cards you're dealt.
Great, thank you. Alex, any?
Wow, what would I add to everything that you've already said that's so comprehensive? I guess something different is to also think about, as institutions, that institutions try to go at it alone, right? That like for all of these added expectations, that the natural sort of game for a lot of institutions is we need to do this alone. We need to home grow this, right? We need to create the expertise internally to be able to provide all of these services. And so I guess my plug would be think about partnerships, right? Think about partnering with other organizations that have the core competencies that are doing some of this work really, really well that are outside of the institutions, right? So what do those kinds of coordinated efforts and coordinated partnerships look like so that you don't have to develop the expertise in-house? There are lots of folks who are dealing with successfully food insecurity, for instance, right? So are there partnerships rather than trying to build a homegrown program? There are lots of folks who are providing micro scholarships and micro loans to students and who have developed the expertise around how to administer those kinds of programs. So are there potential opportunities for partnerships? So that would be the piece of wisdom, right? Rather than trying to build all of these things in-house, are there experts? You know, there are lots of technology experts, right? Folks who are doing this work a lot better, but I talk to a lot of campuses that are building their own, right? Building their own internal apps or building their own software. So how might you think about the ecosystem as a comprehensive ecosystem rather than trying to build everything internally?
Great, thank you. And I will say that we're just about out of time. So in order to bring this session to a close, I am going to ask each of our presenters if they would leave us with a sentence of one sentence or comment for inspiration or aspiration. What would you like to leave us with? And Michelle, we'll start with you.
I would just say that the opportunities ahead are vast. It is not a sort of desolate climate that we are facing. It's really exciting, and I think to Alex's point, and Doug mentioned it as well, this is an ecosystem of many stakeholders and living and non-living things, right? We have policymakers, we have employers, educators, we have policies, we have education technologies. It is hubris for us to think that we can go it alone, and we have to think about building a better coalition in service of adult learners, which is all of us, because we are all going to need this system to work better.
Thank you.
Wow, inspiration. So I draw my inspiration from our students, right? Day in and day out. The conversations that we have with students. We hire recent college graduates, right? So folks who have been out of school for 3 years or less. That's where the hope comes from, right? So let's enlist them as co-creators and co-designers. They are ready. They are ready to take this on, and I am inspired by their renewed sense of activism, their renewed sense of I am willing to take this on. I'm willing to take this challenge. They recognize that they have been underserved by our education institutions, and they're ready to do something about it. So for me, it's let's just tap into our students and tap into their wisdom, because I think that's the only way that we're really going to be able to achieve these solutions.
Thank you. And Doug?
To me, if there's if the most legitimate critique, I think, of higher education, potential critique, is complacency. And I think, and again, a room full of you is evidence that you're not complacent, and so you are part of the inspiration. But I guess what I would, to me, the big lift for higher education is open up the hood, look inside at what you're doing. I know it can be risky to reveal weakness, to show imperfection when you've got legislators who might poke at you or whatever. But I think we have a very forgiving population. They want to know that you are wanting to do better. So open up the hood, look inside, identify things that are suboptimal. You don't have to admit that they stink, but if they're not as good as they could be, experiment and try and improve. And that's how you're gonna that's gonna be the ultimate proof.
Thank you. I want to thank our guests today for a provocative session. Please help me thank them one more time. And I really think they've given us, I really want to thank you, because in addition to copious notes, and I know my colleagues have as well, I really encourage you to join us in having those conversations in the hallways to keep these conversations going. But this was absolutely spectacular today. So thank you, each one. Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thanks, Doug. It is now, oh, don't go. Please don't go. Stay. Because it is my distinct pleasure now to welcome to the stage Executive Vice Chancellor Dr. Lauren Blanchard.
Make sure they didn't leave us.
I know.
Good afternoon. I certainly want to start by thanking all of you for joining us for this year's 2025 symposium as we celebrate the progress we have made, reaffirm our commitment to student success, and really learn from our colleagues, both in the CSU and across the nation. As Dr. Miner said earlier this afternoon, that we have much to celebrate. For another year, we have improved our graduation rates across the board. And as a result, all of our CSU students that we're working to ensure that every single one of them will be able to earn a degree and pursue their future armed with knowledge, skills, and dispositions that they will need to be successful. Indeed, in my mind, this is something for which we should all stand very proud. But you know, and as Doug Lederman said earlier, we knew that there's a but coming. The data also show that we have more to do because our equity gaps persist. This is not a surprise. Generations of inequity in education simply cannot be eradicated overnight. There is a reason that when the chancellor announced his goal to entirely eliminate our equity gaps, that there were those in higher education who thought that we may be aiming way too high. But just because it isn't easy doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. And besides, we're the California State University. We have a history of stepping up to meet challenges, of acting boldly on behalf of our students. To close the equity gaps, to achieve our graduation rate goals, and to ensure that every student has the opportunity to successfully earn a degree, we must redouble our efforts. In my travels among our 23 campuses, I've often had the opportunity to discuss our Graduation Initiative 2025 efforts. And as I go out to the campuses, it always proves to be a bright spot in my week. And I'm a committed believer in the importance of this work that we're doing. And I'm consistently impressed by the skilled and dedicated work of all of you. Plus, it's a great opportunity to trade the system office in Long Beach for the vibrancy of what happens on campus life. That's always a win in my book. During these meetings on campuses with faculty and students, advisors, and student affairs professionals, my comments are often met with optimism and occasionally with skepticism. But they are always met with questions. Questions that invariably include, why have we undertaken Graduation Initiative 2025? And how are we working to accomplish our goals? The first question in my mind is relatively easy to answer. We've undertaken this initiative because the state needs it, and more importantly, because every one of our students deserve it. At CSU Dominguez Hills, there is a first-generation, second-year student by the name of Rogelio Perez. And with so many CSU students, Rogelio came to college with a very little idea of what to expect and with no shortage of trepidation. He had no connection to the campus community and no clue where to begin when it came time to set up his courses and his class schedule. But the campus connected Rogelio with a peer mentor who's assisted him in identifying his course schedule. In addition, Rogelio had long struggled in the area of mathematics. He had entered the CSU system in 2017. He would likely have been relegated to a standalone developmental education course. He would not have received credit for the course, causing him to fall behind in his classmates and costing him money. But because he entered when he did, he could have easily been one of the 25% of the students assigned to developmental education and would not have returned for the second year at CSU. Instead, as a result of campus efforts that's related to our new academic preparation policies, Rogelio was enrolled in a college-level mathematics course where he received 150 minutes of extra instruction each week to ensure his success. And Rogelio earned an A in that math class. And college credit. And today, Rogelio is planning to major in computer science. So I'm not foolish. Each of you have a Rogelio on your campus. In fact, chances are you have thousands of Rogelios on your campus. These students, they are the why. The answer to why we are undertaking Graduation Initiative 2025, to give all students the opportunity and support needed to earn a degree and build a successful future. On its face, the second question, how are we working to achieve the initiative's goals, seems easy to answer as well. In my conversations with a number of CSU constituents, I typically highlight the new system-wide academic preparation policies that are improving outcomes for students, and then talk about the 6 operational pillars associated with Graduation Initiative 2025, which most of you, I'm sure, could spout off very easily. Academic preparation, our focus on enrollment management, student engagement and well-being, data-informed decision-making, financial support, and administrative barriers. But here's where it gets a bit tricky, because it's at this point when someone invariably says to me, well, yes, Lauren, but we've already done all of this work on our campus. We've been doing it now for 4 years. What more do you expect us to do? It's a fair question, one that my staff and I ask ourselves every Monday morning when we meet. It's a question I imagine you have asked or have been asked by your colleagues. What more can we actually do to better student success on our campuses? One of the most difficult periods of time in any lengthy initiative is when you're nearing the halfway mark. You've come too far to see the starting line, but you aren't quite yet in view of the finish. It's far too easy for enthusiasm to fade, for momentum to slip, and for progress to stagnate. But we know that this is exactly the time when our efforts are the most important, because the class that will determine our 6-year graduation rate goals and our equity gap goals, like all of our students, they deserve every opportunity to reach their degree goals. And they're here now, right in front of us. And so I challenge each and every one of us here to gather together our staffs, your colleagues, your peers, acknowledge the progress that you've made thus far, take a deep breath, as was said earlier, smell the roses, and start identifying what more we can actually do. Put every program, every process, every strategy that you've implemented under the microscope, and ask yourself 3 questions. First, is it effective? Do you have outcomes, data, or evidence demonstrating its efficacy? Second, if placed alongside national models, does it hold on its own or does it pale in comparison? And finally, if you could start over and recreate all that you have done around student success, would you do it the same way? Let's consider academic advising, which is, as you well know, a system-wide priority. We know that one of the most important predictors of whether a student will finish their degree in a timely manner is the number of units they take each term. Data consistently show us that students who take a full load are not harmed. In fact, in many cases, they outperform those who do not. To that end, a number of campuses have developed or are developing programs aimed at increasing student average unit load. They are also shifting away from this deficit model and replacing it with models founded on the understanding that students can be successful at a higher average unit load with appropriate advising support. So what more can we do then? We can use the 3 questions I posed earlier as a guide, and there are actions you can take to improve academic advising. For example, degree plans. They're an essential aspect of improving student persistence and completion. Can you increase the percentage of students who have a degree plan? Is it possible to get those degree plans into the hands of students before they even step foot on our respective campuses? What will work best for your campus, for your students, to ensure that they have a clear path to a degree on the very first day that they arrive on your respective campuses? Can you rethink current advising structures to improve coordination across the various offices or campuses where students receive their guidance? What about combining existing data systems to increase the availability and use of real-time information that advisors can then use to support their students? And to ensure that no student stops out without anyone ever being aware that they were struggling, can our campuses rethink or create a process to ensure that every student has at least one individual or an office responsible for monitoring their progress from day 1 through to degree completion? While I use academic advising to highlight this point, I readily acknowledge that this effort and the results are not going to be one size fits all. It's going to look different in Humboldt than it will in San Diego. It will look different in Los Angeles versus Stanislaus. And that's okay, because our campuses really, our communities, and our students are not the same. What's important is finding the answers that will most benefit your students. Indeed, I know that much of this work is already underway. One of my favorite examples comes from CSU East Bay, where there is a faculty member, an assistant professor by the name of Michelle Rippey, who was part of the CSU Certificate Program in Student Success Analytics. She herself had been a first-generation college student, so it was no surprise that when it came time to do a deep dive into the data, she chose to focus on the persistence rate of first-year, first-generation college students at CSU East Bay. From these data, she learned a great deal about the East Bay students, their struggles, the most critical moments in their college experience, and the points that they were most at risk of stopping out. She pledged to incorporate what she learned into her classroom. That alone would have really been enough, a major step forward toward improving student success and the goals of Graduation Initiative 2025, but Michelle didn't stop there. She shared what she learned with fellow faculty members at a professional development day on her campus. She secured funding for a first-generation student orientation and the formation of a first-generation, first-year cohort for student support. And this year, those programs are providing foundational knowledge on how to succeed at CSU East Bay, as well as an introduction to campus support programs, all presented by first-generation faculty and first-generation staff. Michelle Rippey asked herself the question, what more can I do? And the answers she found are having a profound impact on student success at CSU East Bay. Thank you, Michelle. And she's right here in the audience. Stand up, Michelle. And so I really encourage each of you to bring a critical eye to all of your programs and processes, examining them very carefully for efficacy, for innovation, and for excellence. And then ask, what more can the California State University do? What more can my campus do? What more can I do? Successfully meeting our Graduation Initiative 2025 goals on behalf of nearly 500,000 students will depend on how all of us answer that call. It's now my pleasure to invite everyone to proceed to the Gardenia Room for what is my favorite event of the entire symposium, the Faculty Innovation and Leadership Award reception. This reception will honor faculty members from across the CSU who have been fearless in asking what more can they do to support students. The answers they have found have had a tremendous impact on student success on our campuses and across the CSU. Thank you so much for joining us for this session. I hope you've enjoyed it. Enjoy the reception and the rest of the symposium.